So I'm interested in doing what might seem like sort of an odd video because it's talking about some of the diagnostic criteria and the core features of autism, particularly as they relate to adults. I say this might be an odd thing because, well, it's now 11 years after the publication of the DSM 5, which changed autism spectrum disorder, and which we will specifically be referring to for in this video. And the ICD has also been published for quite a while now. And so, of course, it seems a bit late, if nothing else, to be discussing this. However, I have found over time that as I'm seeing more discussions about autism and the traits of autism and so on, I see these things happening where people are talking about traits or symptoms or this or that in relation to autism, but whatever they're talking about, I don't know, whatever it may be another condition, it may be a quirk, it may be just something a lot of people do. I don't know, it depends on the situation. But my point is, um, that these things aren't always traits of autism, but they're being signed as traits of autism, often simply because the person is autistic, um, or believes they are, or so on and so forth. Um, so what the I want to first look at the actual diagnostic criteria for autism. And what the DSM did is change the well, it it changed some old kind of names of disorders. I won't get into it in this video, but now we have what is autism spectrum disorder. And within that, there are kind of two main diagnostic criteria categories. The first category uh, regards social communication and interaction, while the second category is about restricted and repetitive behaviors. That is it. Um, Now, so let us see. Um, a child must have deficits in each of the three areas. A child, that's interesting. Um, and two of the four types of restricted repetitive behaviors. So, let's see. The social deficits in social emotional reciprocity. So this includes abnormal social approach, failure to of normal back and forth conversation, um, so kind of reduced interest overall, or ability overall in sharing and general back and forth conversations, small talk, basically. Deficits in nonverbal communication, so eye contact, body language, uh, use of gestures, facial expressions. Okay, and then the third is deficits in developing, maintaining, and understanding relationships. You have to have issues in all three of those things. Hi, hi. Sorry, he's kind of that's trick. Um, so the second part is about the communi- the the restricted and repetitive behaviors, interest, activities, manifested by at least two of the following: stereotyped movements or speech. Um, okay, lining up toys, things of that nature. Um, insistence on sameness, need for routines, patterns, rigid thinking patterns. Okay. Number three, highly restricted, fixated interest on objects. Four, hyper or hypo reactivity to sensory input or an unusual interest in sensory aspects of the environment. All right, that was a lot of wording that I tried to condense. Okay, but yes, so that's what that is. That's where you get a lot of special interests, I think is kind of the term being used now. Um, and then sensory issues. So yeah, um, there is. I do want to preface this all with saying this has to be something that the severity of it may not have been present all throughout one's life, but if someone really didn't start struggling until they're 18, then you get into the point when you might not start looking at kind of this is a transition in life where this person um, can't, they can't meet up, so there are developmentally issues. Um, but when you start getting at those developmental periods, 18 and beyond, you might start even looking at things like schizoid personality disorder. But I'm not, yeah. The level of impairment, of course, it has to be impairing. If you are not disabled by these symptoms, and some to a certain extent, then it doesn't matter. You could have all of these symptoms. If you're not disabled by them, you simply are not autistic, because it's not about having a symptom or not. It's about meeting the diagnostic criteria for the condition. And in order to do that, one of the caveats is it has to cause significant or to a certain level of impairment. That is the rules, as it were. Um, and the third caveat is that the symptoms aren't better explained by another condition. Now, there can be, of course, conditions that are co-diagnosed, but that's another topic. The DSM-5 did introduce a new condition called social pragmatic communication disorder. Effectively, those who may have had tendencies, especially towards what they might have called the Asperger's syndrome side, they may, not have had some of those restricted interests or behaviors. Yeah. So that would be so if there was just deficits in social communication, that would actually be a different disorder, which is social pragmatic communication disorder. Um, and then there's a bunch of kind of diagnostic criteria specifiers that I'm not going to get into because it can be found online. So um, so I want to start talking about what I've seen as kind of core features of autism in adults. And this is somewhat anecdotal from interacting in chat rooms, from interacting with other people who get supports from myself, from this, that, and the other. But to another extent, this is also a lot of other research that has nothing to do with me. Well, autism, but it's not nobody involved has anything to do with me. Um, so I would like to point out that, and I might be off in this, and that is fair. But what I have found is people with autism do have a desire to socialize or kind of an apathy about socializing. Like they don't particularly care one way or the other. What I have not personally found, at least as a direct cause from autism, is for people to be negative about, so like not want to, well, yeah, they're outright negative about other people and about interactions. Of course, over time, someone on the spectrum might be kind of bullied and have negative views, but this outright kind of nihilistic view that some people have, um, that's not really a trait with autism. Um, that nihilism I have not seen, but that's just me. I think some people have associated that with like some people I've heard like think like Dr. House is from well, House is like that, but that's I think much more nihilism than is really there in a true diagnosis of autism. But hey, I may be wrong. Um, a second feature I've seen is um, there's a lot of obsessive tendencies, and I'm going with to say tendencies because as the second category elucidated, these tendencies aren't just about these special interests, they're also about a need for routine and repetition, um, kind of this inflexibility, kind of needing to do things often the same way every time. They, they, myself included, um, they resistant to change, and it's not just that they're resistant, and this is something I do want to make very clear. It's not just that they're being difficult. It's that change is a very stressful thing. This is you as somebody you have to remember, they may be able to speak very clearly to you, but at their core, they still have a developmental delay that's going to be affecting them the rest of their life. Their emotional development is really pretty much always going to be several years behind their chronological age. Um, and so they may not, for one, they have less developed coping skills than what their chronological age is going to suggest, on top of having to deal with this condition. And getting confused can be even more frightening when you have a developmental delay. So if you don't know what's going to happen, then finding a response to that can be even more difficult. And the kind of fear of that and the what ifs and the unknowns is often what is driving that obsessiveness. at least for the kind of routine and the lack of change and the inflexibility in those areas. The special interests are a rather interesting one because it seems when I look online, everybody has a special interest. When I'm looking in like these autistic spaces, they might have these very intense obsessions with things, but it's not always these grand things you kind of think about, if you will. A lot of people on the spectrum aren't even necessarily kind of obsessed with a certain topic, but they are collectors. And I noticed that to be the case with a lot of adult autistics and even teen adolescent autistics is a lot of them, even if they have obsessive interests, they are obsessive collectors with a very narrow um, range for kind of misalignment or error in the way that they conduct and keep their collections. That is something that I don't think is kind of specified in the DSM, but anecdotally I have and I think is even in the research, but may not be clear what this means in the text when it says obsessive interest. I believe what they mean based on case studies that I've read and other things. I believe they're including um, intense collections, sort of collections of bouncy balls. I've heard of collections that were not so great that I'm not going to get into in a video uh, that is already this long because some of those topics would take a lot of explaining. Um, so yes, the speech, and I want to go back to the kind of communication one. I kind of, um, yeah, often they will have odd pausing, odd tone. They might repeat things, which is possibly echolalia, depending on the context. Um, there might be kind of speech issues that are persistent or that come back when there's high distress. Meltdowns. Meltdowns are going to continue to happen. Um, it's just reality. There are ways to mitigate them and to help with that, but again, not the topic of this video. One thing that I don't think that the criteria really necessarily outlined was a lot of this has to do with issues in kind of goal direction and planning and execution of a task and basic what would be considered executive functioning skills. And of course, any doctor is very well aware of this, but I'm not sure that I don't think it was ever clearly stated, and maybe that's just my misguided or misinformed view. But what I want to point out is with adults on the spectrum, they often, very often, have issues with task management and self-directed goals and staying on task and switching tasks. It is very difficult for them. Part of that goes back to um, need for sameness and routine. Some of that goes back to kind of poor executive functioning skills and kind of the going with the flow of the world, if you will. Um, so I believe this is really all I have to say about these for the most part. Um, I do want to pose a question, a final question, and I'm kind of crisscrossing the topics here, but on the topic of tone indicators, I've often heard that they were created primarily for the neurodiversity community, but to me that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And the reason being is because tone indicators alone really don't help much. If you're talking about someone with a social deficit, even in a chat room, the understanding of the phrasing and the emojis and the this and the that is goes so much more into it than a tone indicator would solve. Personally, I think tone indicators are performative, that they're someone came up with this idea and said, "Oh hey, these are these are great for neurodiverse people. These really help." But I just don't understand what neurodiverse people it's actually helping. I mean, sure, okay, I have seen people online claim it helps. I've seen people online claim a lot of things help. That doesn't mean much, frankly, yeah, unfortunately. I have not seen when tone indicators help people who are autistic. Even still, even with these tone indicators, questions have to be asked. That's just the way the world works. So I don't understand kind of what is the end point of these tone indicator things and who is really subscribing to these things. Um, I mean, I guess my point is I don't know people who are also in services who use tone indicators. The only places I've seen online, I gave it away. Online are the only spaces I've seen people care about these tone and with people in real life. I meant like through text and things like that, and but nobody's worried about that. People even online who are diagnosed in real life, depending on the situation, often you know it's just a different conversation that is being had, I feel, nowadays about tone indicators and how they do and don't help and why they do and don't help, and is that reality? I am quite critical of it, but I'm quite critical of everything, so who knows. um anyway, this is quite a long video and I should probably be getting ready for bed anyway. um Please leave a response to the issue of tone indicators. If you feel like there are any major traits that I've missed, um, let me know. Although, of course, I do want to point out that This is, of course, these kind of core features and going off the diagnostic criteria of the DSM. I've got a copy of the pages here in front of me that I was reading off of. Anyway, so with that, have a good one. Bye bye.